I need to tell you something that might sting at first, but I promise you, it will set you free. There is a part of you right now, in this very moment, that is disappearing. Not your body, not your face, something far more essential. Your true self is fading, becoming translucent, vanishing into the background of your own life. And the most terrifying part? You are the one making yourself invisible. You do this every single day without realizing it. You do it when someone asks what you really think, and you offer a safe, watered-down version instead. You do it when you laugh at jokes that don't amuse you, when you nod along with opinions that make your soul recoil, when you dress yourself in acceptable thoughts like ill-fitting clothes. You have learned to erase yourself so skillfully, so automatically, that you no longer notice the act of erasure. You have become a ghost, haunting your own existence. I have spent my entire life studying the human psyche, diving deep into the caverns of consciousness, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that this self-erasure is the most widespread psychological epidemic of our time. It was true in my era, and from what I can sense, it is even more devastating in yours. You are surrounded by images, voices, expectations, an endless chorus telling you who to be, how to appear, what to value. And in response, you have developed a habit so insidious, so perfectly camouflaged, that it feels like survival itself. You have learned to betray yourself in order to belong. But here is what nobody tells you about this bargain. When you make yourself invisible to avoid rejection, you do not find acceptance. You find something far worse. You find a hollow version of connection where others see only the mask you wear, never the face beneath. You become successful at being someone you are not, which is the most profound form of failure I can imagine. You win at a game that destroys you from within. Let me be clear about what I mean by invisibility. I am not talking about shyness or introversion. Those are temperaments, natural ways of being. I am talking about self-abandonment, the systematic suppression of your authentic reactions, your genuine desires, your true voice. It is the habit of asking yourself not, what do I really feel? But what should I feel? Not, what do I want? But what is acceptable to want? You have replaced your inner compass with a surveillance system, constantly monitoring yourself for anything that might be too much, too different, too real. This habit has a name in my work, though I never quite captured its full devastation in a single term. It is the shadow work, in reverse. Instead of integrating what you have hidden, you are actively hiding what should be integrated. You are taking the raw gold of your authentic self and burying it deeper, convinced it is worthless or dangerous. And here is where the tragedy deepens, where the wound becomes infected. Because when you consistently perform a self that is not truly you, something peculiar happens in the psyche. The mask begins to believe it is the face, the persona you have constructed for approval, for safety, for belonging. It starts to claim ownership of your entire identity. You wake up one day and realize you cannot remember who you were before you started pretending. The performance has run so long that the actor has forgotten there was ever a script. You have become a stranger to yourself, living in a house where all the mirrors show someone else's reflection. I have watched this unfold countless times in my years of analytical work. A woman comes to me, successful by all external measures, and she weeps because she feels nothing. She has climbed every ladder, checked every box, received every accolade her family and society demanded. And yet, she describes her life as watching a film of someone else's existence. She is there, but she is not present. She is alive, but she is not living. This is not mere unhappiness. This is not simple dissatisfaction. This is the soul's rebellion against its own imprisonment. It is what I would call a spiritual emergency, the psyche's desperate attempt to wake you from the trance of inauthenticity. The symptoms manifest in countless ways. Perhaps you find yourself inexplicably anxious, though your life appears perfectly arranged. Perhaps you are plagued by dreams of being trapped, of missing important appointments, of searching for something you cannot name. Perhaps you develop physical ailments that no doctor can explain, because the body is expressing what the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. Your psyche is screaming, "This is not the life we agreed to live." But instead of listening, most people do what? They double down. They perform harder. They add another layer to the mask, convinced that if they can just perfect the illusion, the emptiness will disappear. They seek validation more desperately. They chase achievement more frantically. They mold themselves more completely to whatever they believe will finally earn them the right to exist as they are. It never works. It cannot work. Because you are running from the only thing that can save you yourself. And so the question becomes, how do we stop running? You must turn around. You must face the shadow. Quote, "I know this sounds unbearable. Every fiber of your being will resist it, because to face the shadow means to acknowledge what you have denied, to see what you have refused to see, to feel what you have spent years numbing. But here is what I discovered in my own descent, and what I have witnessed in countless others. The moment you turn and face it, something extraordinary happens. The monster loses its power. Not because it disappears, no, it remains. But because you are no longer giving it the energy of your fear. You are no longer feeding it with your avoidance. You are simply seeing it for what it truly is. And what is it really? It is a part of you that was rejected. A piece of your humanity that you were told was unacceptable. An emotion you learned to be ashamed of. A desire you were taught to suppress. A truth about yourself that didn't fit the image you were supposed to maintain. The shadow is not evil. It is unlived life. It is the aspects of yourself that were exiled before they could be integrated, understood, or transformed. Think of a child who is punished for expressing anger. What happens to that anger? It doesn't vanish. It goes underground. It becomes part of the shadow, where it festers and grows distorted, emerging later in life as passive aggression, sudden explosions, or chronic resentment. Or consider someone raised to be perpetually selfless, never allowed to have needs of their own. That natural self-interest doesn't disappear. It becomes shadowy, expressing itself through manipulation, martyrdom, or secret selfishness that they cannot even acknowledge to themselves. The shadow holds everything you couldn't afford to be and still receive love, belonging, or approval. But here's the paradox that changes everything. The shadow also holds your unclaimed power. Your creativity lives there. Your passion, your authenticity, your life force. Every time you said, "I'm not that kind of person," you exiled a part of your potential into darkness. Every time you suppressed your truth to fit in, you strengthened the shadow. This is why integration is not just about confronting darkness. It's about reclaiming light. The shadow, you see, does not discriminate between what society calls virtuous and what it calls vice. It swallows everything you reject about yourself, the rage, yes, but also the ambition you were told was selfish, the sensuality you learned to call shameful, the creativity you dismissed as impractical. I've watched patients weep not over their cruelty, but over the compassion they'd buried because showing tenderness in their family meant weakness. One man, a surgeon of considerable reputation, came to me paralyzed by depression. We discovered together that his shadow held not monsters, but music, a passion for piano. He'd abandoned at 14 because his father proclaimed it unmanly. For 30 years, that rejected beauty had festered in darkness, poisoning his days with inexplicable emptiness. This is the peculiar tyranny of the shadow. It returns what we refuse, but in distorted form. The ambition we suppress doesn't disappear. It emerges as bitter envy of others' success. The anger we deny doesn't evaporate. It seeps out as passive aggression, as chronic resentment, as mysterious illness. The sexuality we repress doesn't vanish. It manifests as obsession, as judgment of others, as inexplicable fascination with exactly what we claim to despise. You've seen this in the world, haven't you? The politician who crusades most loudly against a particular vice, only to be discovered indulging in it secretly. The religious leader who rails against desire while harboring it in darkness. We reserve our harshest judgment for the things we've exiled from our own consciousness. Show me what triggers your most violent reaction in others, and I'll show you what you've refused to acknowledge in yourself. This is why the shadow grows more dangerous the longer we ignore it. In darkness, these rejected parts of ourselves don't mature. They remain primitive, childish, unintegrated. The 40-year-old executive who never acknowledged his anger still has the rage of a 3-year-old inside him, waiting to explode. The parent who suppressed all spontaneity for duty carries within them a wild child who will sabotage responsibility at the worst possible moments. This is why integration is not optional, it's a matter of psychological survival. The shadow will have its say, one way or another. The only question is whether you will meet it consciously, with courage, or whether it will ambush you from the dark. I have watched this pattern repeat itself across thousands of lives. The man who prided himself on being nice suddenly erupts in violence that shocks everyone, including himself. The woman who built her identity around control finds herself compulsively sabotaging every relationship. These aren't random breakdowns, they're the shadow demanding recognition, forcing its way into consciousness through the cracks in our carefully constructed personas. And here is the terrible irony. The very qualities we most need are often the ones we've exiled to the shadow. The passive person who needs assertiveness has locked away their aggression. The rigid perfectionist who needs creativity has banished their spontaneity. We are starving for the nutrients we ourselves have buried. You see, the psyche operates on a principle of compensation. Whatever we overemphasize in consciousness, the unconscious will balance in the opposite direction. Show me someone who is excessively spiritual, floating in transcendent states, denying the body and earthly existence, and I will show you a shadow, thick with materialistic impulses, base desires, and unacknowledged greed. Show me someone who is relentlessly logical, who trusts only reason, and dismisses all emotion, and beneath that rational surface swims a sea of irrational feelings, ready to pull them under. This is not punishment. It's the psyche's attempt at wholeness, at equilibrium. But when we refuse to participate consciously in this balancing act, the unconscious takes matters into its own hands. It sends us symptoms, anxiety, depression, compulsions, inexplicable fears. It sends us dreams that disturb our sleep. It sends us encounters with people who trigger us disproportionately, who carry the very qualities we've denied in ourselves. That colleague who irritates you beyond reason? Look closer. They are probably expressing something you've forbidden yourself to express. That relative whose lifestyle you judge harshly? They are likely living out a possibility you've locked away in your own shadow. Our strongest reactions reveal our deepest denials. The mechanism of projection operates with such precision that you can use your reactions as a diagnostic tool. When someone's success fills you with bitterness rather than inspiration, ask yourself, what ambition have I abandoned? When someone's vulnerability triggers your contempt, examine, what softness have I forbidden myself? I observed this repeatedly in my practice. The businessman who ridiculed artists was himself a failed painter. The intellectual who dismissed emotion had never processed his childhood grief. The religious zealot obsessed with others' sexuality was battling his own desires. We don't hate what we don't recognize. We hate what we've refused to become. This is why social media has become such a perfect mirror for the collective shadow. The outrage, the moral crusades, the public shamings. These are projection theaters on a massive scale. Everyone is pointing fingers at the darkness in others while remaining blind to their own. The algorithms have learned to monetize our shadows, feeding us content that triggers our projections because anger and judgment keep us scrolling. But here's what makes this particularly dangerous. When you project your shadow, you give away your power. You make the external world responsible for your internal discomfort. That person who makes you angry doesn't actually have that power. Your anger exists because they've activated something unresolved within you. They're not doing something to you, they're revealing something about you. And when you live in constant projection, you cannot change. Because if all your problems exist out there, in other people, then you're helpless. You become a victim of your environment, forever waiting for others to change so you can feel better. This is the ultimate trap, blaming the mirror for the reflection. The liberation comes when you reverse the direction. When someone triggers you, instead of asking, "What's wrong with them?" 1. Ask, "What is this showing me about myself?" This single shift in perspective transforms every difficult encounter into an opportunity for self-discovery. I'm not suggesting that injustice doesn't exist or that all criticism is projection. Some things genuinely deserve opposition, but the emotional charge reveals the difference. Righteous anger directed at genuine injustice carries a different quality than the reactive, personal fury that comes from triggered shadows. When you see clearly, you can act decisively without being consumed by emotion. When you're caught in projection, you act from compulsion, and your actions often perpetuate the very patterns you claim to oppose. This brings us to a crucial distinction that many miss in their rush to change the world. Transformation versus substitution. The ego loves substitution, swapping one set of beliefs for another, one tribe for a different tribe, one enemy for another enemy. It feels like progress, like awakening, like becoming a better person. But the underlying structure remains identical. You've simply replaced the content while keeping the same psychological mechanism intact. True transformation, what I call individuation, involves becoming conscious of the mechanism itself. It's not about having the right opinions or joining the right movement. It's about developing the capacity to observe your own reactions, to catch yourself in the act of projection, to feel the gravitational pull of tribal thinking, and choose something different. This requires a kind of brutal honesty that most people find unbearable. I've watched individuals spend years in analysis, doing the difficult work of confronting their shadows, only to suddenly encounter a political or social issue that triggers them, and instantly, all that hard work seems to evaporate. They're back in the playground, throwing rocks at the other tribe, convinced this time it's different. This time it's justified. This time, the enemy really is evil. The shadow has simply found a new mask to wear, one that's socially sanctioned, even celebrated. And here's where it gets truly insidious. Our current moment has created entire industries around validated projection. Social media platforms algorithmically amplify content that triggers moral outrage. News organizations have discovered that nothing drives engagement quite like stories about the enemy tribe's latest transgression. Political movements on all sides have learned to weaponize collective shadow projection, pointing their followers toward acceptable targets for their unprocessed rage and fear. The result is a culture of perpetual outrage, where people spend hours each day consuming content designed to confirm their projections and intensify their tribal identity. And what is truly insidious is that this process feels righteous. When you're caught in the grip of shadow projection, your anger doesn't feel like personal dysfunction, it feels like moral clarity. You're not being irrational, you're finally seeing the truth. You're not contributing to division, You're standing up for what's right. I watched this pattern countless times in my practice. The patient who couldn't see his own controlling nature, but raged against the authoritarianism of others. The woman who denied her own sexuality while obsessing over the moral failures of those she deemed promiscuous. In each case, the projection provided a kind of psychological relief. It's far easier to wage war against external enemies than to face the darkness within. But here's what social media has done that's genuinely unprecedented. It has created permanent audiences for our projections. In my era, a person might project their shadow onto their neighbor or colleague, creating local conflicts that, while painful, remained contained. Today, you can broadcast your projections to thousands or millions, finding immediate validation from those who share your tribal identity. This changes everything. Because when your projection is immediately reinforced by hundreds of approving comments, when it's shared and amplified and treated as profound insight, the corrective mechanism that might have helped you recognize it as projection is effectively destroyed. The community becomes an echo chamber that hardens your certainty that the evil truly exists out there, not within. I've seen threads where people work themselves into states of genuine hysteria over the perceived moral failings of the opposing tribe. Each comment feeding the frenzy, the collective shadow growing darker and more monstrous with each contribution. No one stops to ask, what am I not seeing in myself? What disowned part of my own psyche am I encountering in this enemy I've constructed? And the platforms, of course, have no incentive to interrupt this process. Outrage is profitable. Tribal warfare keeps people engaged. The algorithm doesn't care about your psychological wholeness, it cares about your screen time. And the tragedy is this. We believe we're thinking for ourselves. We scroll through our feeds, consuming opinion after opinion, each one delivered with absolute certainty, each one triggering emotional responses we mistake for insight. We collect these fragments like a magpie collects shiny objects, building nests of borrowed beliefs we call our worldview. But these aren't your thoughts. They're echoes, reverberations in the collective chamber. I watch people defend positions they adopted only days ago with the ferocity of religious martyrs. Why? Because to question the belief would be to question the tribe, and to question the tribe would be to face the terrifying prospect of standing alone. Your social media profile isn't a reflection of who you are, it's a demonstration of which collective you've pledged allegiance to. Every post, every share, every carefully crafted comment is a signal. I belong here. I am one of you. Please don't cast me out. The fear of excommunication from the digital tribe is so powerful that people will abandon their own perceptual evidence, their own lived experience, in favor of maintaining group cohesion. I've observed this pattern countless times in my analytical work. A patient comes to me in distress, unable to reconcile their inner truth with the demands of their collective. They feel something deeply, know something in their bones, but the group insists otherwise. The cognitive dissonance creates profound suffering. In previous eras, this tension played out in families, churches, small communities. Now it plays out on a global stage, amplified by technology, with millions watching. The pressure to conform isn't just social anymore. It's algorithmic. The machine learns what keeps you engaged and feeds you more of it, creating echo chambers so sophisticated that you don't even realize you're in one. You think you're exploring diverse perspectives because you follow accounts from both sides. But the algorithm has already learned your patterns. It shows you the version of the other side most likely to trigger your disgust, your outrage, your sense of superiority. It's not showing you reality, it's showing you a funhouse mirror designed to confirm what you already believe. This is the shadow at work through technology. The algorithm becomes an externalized projection system. It takes everything you've rejected about yourself, everything you refuse to acknowledge, and it serves it back to you in the form of them. Those people. The other side. The ones who are ruining everything. I once wrote that thinking is difficult, therefore let the herd pronounce judgment. The algorithm has perfected this ancient human tendency. It doesn't want you to think, it wants you to react. Because reaction is predictable. Reaction is measurable. Reaction keeps you scrolling. And here's what makes it so insidious. It feels like consciousness. It feels like you're awake, while everyone else is asleep. The algorithm feeds you just enough truth, just enough genuine problems, real injustices, legitimate concerns that you believe you're seeing clearly. But it's mixing that truth with poison. It's showing you reality through a lens of perpetual emergency, where every issue is existential, every disagreement is warfare. Every person who thinks differently is either evil or brainwashed. You start to believe that you're one of the few who really understands what's happening. This is the inflation of the ego. The dangerous belief that you have transcended the confusion that plagues ordinary people. But let me tell you something I learned through decades of working with the human psyche. The moment you believe you're fully awake is precisely the moment you're most deeply asleep. The algorithm knows this. It flatters your intelligence while hijacking it. It makes you feel like a critical thinker while systematically destroying your capacity for actual critical thought. Because real critical thinking requires doubt, nuance, the ability to hold paradox. It requires you to sit with uncertainty, to tolerate ambiguity, to recognize that most human situations are complex beyond any simple narrative. But complexity doesn't generate engagement. Certainty does. Rage does. Fear does. And when you turn off the news, when you close the screen, you sit in silence, and the silence is unbearable. Because you've forgotten how to be with yourself. You've forgotten that solitude is not loneliness. That quiet is not emptiness. That stillness is where wisdom grows. You fill every moment. Podcasts while you cook. Music while you walk. Videos while you eat. Scrolling while you wait. You are terrified of the space between stimuli, because in that space, you might actually feel something. You might remember something. You might have to face the person you've become. I met a man once who told me he couldn't sleep without the television on. The voices, he said, kept him company. But what he really meant was, they kept him distracted from the voices inside his own head. The unresolved conversations. The unlived life. The choices he regretted but wouldn't revisit. Modern life treats attention as infinite, but it is not. It is the most finite resource you possess. Every moment you give to distraction is a moment stolen from meaning, from depth, from the work of becoming whole. You cannot integrate what you do not witness. You cannot heal what you will not face. And you cannot face anything if you are always running. The shadow thrives in this chaos. It grows fat on your exhaustion, your fragmentation, your constant motion. Because when you are too tired to think, when you are too overstimulated to feel, when you are too distracted to notice, you become predictable, controllable. The shadow knows exactly what you'll do, whatever is easiest, whatever numbs fastest, whatever delays the reckoning. This is not rest. This is collapse, pretending to be leisure. You are not recharging. You are draining yourself through a different outlet. And here is the great irony. The more you avoid yourself, the louder yourself becomes. The anxiety rises. The irritability sharpens. The sense of something wrong, something missing, something unbearable. It grows and grows until you need even more distraction to drown it out. You are running from the very thing that could save you. Your own attention, your own presence, your own willingness to sit still and listen, because most of us are starving ourselves while sitting at a banquet table. Think about it. You carry in your pocket a device that can connect you to virtually all human knowledge. You can learn a new language, Study philosophy. Watch lectures from the greatest minds. Create art. Write music. Build something meaningful. But what do we do instead? We scroll. We refresh. We check. We consume whatever algorithm decides to feed us, like birds with open mouths, never questioning what we're being given or why. The spiritual teachers understood something we've forgotten. Attention is the currency of the soul. Where you place your attention, there you place your life force. There you invest your existence. I once treated a patient who came to me exhausted, depleted, unable to work. He described a terrible emptiness, a sense that his life was draining away. Through our sessions, we discovered he was spending 6 to 8 hours daily on social media, gaming forums, and endless streams of content. Not because he enjoyed it. He couldn't even remember what he'd consumed the day before. He was pouring his life energy into a void that gave nothing back. When he finally understood this, truly understood it, he wept, not from sadness, but recognition. He saw that he'd been treating his own consciousness like garbage, dumping it wherever convenient, never considering its value. The shift began when he started asking one simple question before picking up his phone. Is this where I want to be? Not, is this entertaining? Or will this distract me? But, is this truly where I want to place my presence right now? That question became his guardian, his protector against the constant invasion. Within 3 months, his depression lifted. Not because I gave him medication, not because we uncovered childhood trauma, but because he stopped abandoning himself dozens of times per day. He reclaimed his attention. And in doing so, he reclaimed his life. This is what Zarathustra meant when he spoke of creating new values, not accepting what the marketplace offers, not consuming what you're told to consume, but consciously choosing where your energy goes. Your attention is not renewable. Every moment you give away is a moment you will never get back. So, I ask you directly, where is yours going? And yet, we know the answer, don't we? We can feel it in the anxious reach for the phone each morning before our eyes have fully opened, in the phantom vibrations we sense in empty pockets, in the way our hands move automatically to unlock screens while our minds are still forming the intention. This is not agency. This is automaticity. And the gap between the two is where your life disappears. I spent years studying the habits and rituals of patients, looking for patterns in behavior that revealed the deeper movements of the psyche. What I discovered was that most people are not living their lives, they are being lived by their habits. The conscious mind believes it is choosing, while the unconscious simply repeats yesterday's patterns. Social media has weaponized this truth. It has turned your unconscious habits into profit margins. Every app you use has been optimized not for your well-being, but for your predictability. They do not want you engaged, they want you dependent. They have mapped the precise interval between dopamine hits. They know exactly how long to make you wait before delivering the next notification, the next like, the next algorithmic recommendation. They have turned your psychology into mathematics. And here is what troubles me most. You know this. Somewhere in your awareness, you already understand that you are being manipulated. Yet you return anyway, day after day, hour after hour. Why? Because awareness without integration is powerless. Knowing you are trapped does not free you from the trap. Understanding the mechanism does not stop the mechanism. You need something more fundamental than knowledge. You need transformation of your relationship with attention itself. Consider what you are actually doing when you scroll. You are not seeking information. You are not connecting with others. You are performing a peculiar modern ritual. The endless search for something that will finally satisfy. Knowing even as you search, that satisfaction will never come. You are looking for the one post, the one video, the one comment that will deliver the feeling you seek. But that feeling exists nowhere in the feed. It exists only in the seeking itself, in the gap between desire and fulfillment, where the platforms have learned to keep you suspended. This is the psychology of the slot machine, transplanted into the device in your pocket. And like the gambler who tells themselves, just one more pull, you tell yourself, just one more scroll. The mechanism is identical. The variable reward schedule that makes unpredictability more addictive than certainty. Sometimes you find something genuinely interesting. Sometimes it's mediocre. Sometimes it's enraging. But you never know which you'll get, and that uncertainty keeps your thumb moving long after your conscious mind has stopped paying attention. I spent decades studying the symbols that emerge from the collective unconscious, the archetypal images that appear across cultures and throughout history. But what happens when the symbolic life of humanity is curated by algorithms optimized for engagement rather than meaning? When the mythological function, the deep need for narrative and significance, is hijacked by systems designed merely to hold attention, you begin to mistake stimulation for nourishment. You confuse the nervous system activation of outrage with the vitality of genuine passion. You substitute the dopamine hit of validation for the deeper satisfaction of being truly known. The soul, desperate for substance, accepts these counterfeits because they arrive in such abundance that it mistakes quantity for quality. And here is where the problem deepens. These platforms don't just distract you from self-knowledge. They create a false sense that you're pursuing it. Every personality quiz, every astrology meme, every post about mental health or self-improvement gives the impression of introspection while requiring none of its discomfort. You are offered a spirituality of surfaces, a psychology without psyche. True individuation requires confronting what is uncomfortable within you. It demands that you sit with the parts of yourself you'd rather exile, that you integrate the shadow rather than project it onto others. But the feed offers something far easier, a curated identity assembled from the thoughts and images of others, worn like a costume that can be changed whenever it no longer serves you. And so we have created a culture where the language of psychological insight has become a shield against the very work it was meant to facilitate. You hear people speak of trauma without ever doing the difficult work of integration. They use boundaries as a weapon to avoid intimacy rather than as a tool for healthy relationship. They diagnose others with narcissism while remaining blind to their own grandiosity. The psychological vocabulary that should serve as a map toward self-understanding becomes instead a fortress wall, protecting the ego from the destabilizing encounter with the self. I watch with great concern as people collect psychological frameworks the way others collect possessions. Buddhism today, Stoicism tomorrow, perhaps some neuroscience next week, each philosophy tried on briefly and then discarded when it asks too much. The algorithm rewards this spiritual window shopping, this perpetual sampling without digestion. It offers you the illusion of growth without the requirement of transformation. But transformation, real transformation, is not a pleasant process. It is not something you can achieve by following 10 accounts and reading 5-minute summaries. It requires you to descend into the underworld of your own psyche, to confront the monsters lurking there, to retrieve the gold that lies buried beneath years of conditioning and defense mechanisms. The hero's journey is called a journey for a reason. It takes time, courage, and genuine suffering. The feed promises you can skip all that. It tells you that wisdom can be delivered in bite-sized pieces, that you can understand the human psyche through infographics and, quote, cards, that enlightenment is just a matter of learning the right techniques and adopting the right mindset. This is perhaps the most dangerous lie of all, that consciousness can be achieved without sacrifice, that you can transform without losing anything, that you can integrate the shadow while keeping your hands clean. But I have watched this process for decades, the genuine transformation of the psyche. And I can tell you this: it is never clean, it is never convenient. The descent into the unconscious is not a 3-step process you complete over a weekend workshop. When someone truly encounters their shadow, they do not emerge with a polished Instagram post about their healing journey. They emerge shaken, sometimes broken, often unsure of who they are anymore. I remember a patient, a successful businessman, who came to me because, as he put it, he wanted to optimize his psychological performance. He had read some simplified versions of my work, enough to sprinkle terms like individuation and shadow work into conversation at dinner parties. He thought analysis would be like hiring a personal trainer for the mind, a few sessions to identify weaknesses, implement solutions, move forward. 6 months into our work, he sat in my office and wept, not the controlled tears of someone performing vulnerability, but the raw, ugly crying of a man who had just discovered that everything he thought he knew about himself was a carefully constructed defense. He had encountered parts of himself: cruelty, weakness, desire that his conscious mind had spent 40 years denying. "I don't know who I am anymore," he told me. And I said, "Good. Now we can begin." This is what the feed cannot accommodate. Transformation requires you to sit with unbearable uncertainty. It demands you hold paradoxes that will never resolve into simple truths. You must learn to tolerate not knowing, not fixing, not optimizing. The feed cannot survive in that space. It needs answers, solutions, clear before and after narratives. So instead, it offers you shadow work as a product. It gives you journal prompts and guided meditations that promise to help you integrate your shadow in 20 minutes a day, as if the dark, chaotic, untamed aspects of your psyche can be domesticated through positive affirmations and breathing exercises. It turns them into another self-improvement checklist, another way to optimize yourself, another metric by which to measure your spiritual progress on Instagram. The shadow becomes just another feature to upgrade, like your abs or your morning routine. But the shadow doesn't want to be optimized. It doesn't respond to productivity hacks. It's the part of you that exists precisely because you've spent your entire life trying to be good, acceptable, lovable. It's everything you've had to hide to survive in a world that demands you perform a certain version of yourself. And here's what they really don't tell you. Engaging with the shadow is dangerous, not in a romanticized, edgy way, but truly, psychologically dangerous. Because when you start pulling on those threads, you don't know what's going to unravel. You might discover rage you didn't know you were carrying, grief that's been fossilized for decades, desires that contradict everything you thought you believed about yourself. I've seen people begin genuine shadow work and have their marriages fall apart. Not because the work destroyed the marriage, but because they finally admitted they never wanted to be married in the first place. I've seen people quit careers they spent 20 years building because they realized they were living someone else's dream. This is why Jung never promised that individuation would make you happier. He promised it would make you whole. And wholeness includes the parts of you that are inconvenient, messy, socially unacceptable. Wellness culture can't sell you that. It can't monetize your actual transformation, because actual transformation doesn't come in a 12-week program with a certificate at the end. It doesn't fit into content calendars and email funnels. So, instead, what they sell you is the aesthetic of depth without any of the actual descending. They sell you the language of Jung archetypes: shadow, collective, unconscious, stripped of everything that made it powerful and repackaged as another form of self-optimization. And you're left holding a collection of vocabulary that sounds profound but leads you nowhere except back to the marketplace, looking for the next thing that might finally, actually, truly help you find yourself. Meanwhile, the real work, the terrifying, unglamorous, often ugly work of becoming who you actually are, remains untouched. Waiting in the depths, patient as stone. The marketplace loves the shadow work that looks like shadow work. The kind you can post about. The kind that comes with aesthetic journaling and crying beautifully into a ring light. I did my shadow work. Today, posted at 3 p.m. with perfect lighting. But real shadow work doesn't photograph well. It happens at 2 a.m. when you realize the person you've been blaming for everything was just reflecting back what you couldn't admit about yourself. It happens when you discover that your righteous anger at your father's absence is wrapped around your own refusal to show up for anything that actually matters. That's not content. That's confrontation. The culture wants transformation without metamorphosis. It wants the butterfly without the dissolution that happens inside the cocoon. Do you know what occurs in there? The caterpillar doesn't simply sprout wings. It literally digests itself. Its body breaks down into a cellular soup. Only then can it reorganize into something capable of flight. But we want the Instagram version, where you go into the cocoon on Monday looking stressed and come out on Friday with better lighting and a motivational caption. The journey inward isn't a retreat. It's not self-care Sundays and bath bombs. Those things are fine. Comfort has its place, but let's not confuse them with the work. The actual descent requires you to meet everything you've been running from. Every failure you've rebranded as a lesson before you actually learned from it. Every relationship you ended by blaming the other person entirely. Every dream you abandoned while telling yourself you were being realistic. The psyche keeps receipts, and eventually, if you're serious about this, you have to sit down and reconcile the accounts. What I'm describing isn't popular because it doesn't promise you'll like what you find. The modern spiritual marketplace operates on the assumption that your true self is wonderful, just buried under conditioning. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes you dig down and find gold. But sometimes you dig down and find the real reason people kept their distance. Sometimes you find the part of you that's been sabotaging your own life. Because success would mean you'd have no more excuses. Sometimes you find that you've been using your trauma as a shield against having to actually try. This is where the work separates from the performance of work. The performance can last years, decades, even. The real work begins in silence, when no one is watching, when there's no applause waiting, no recognition to be earned. It's in that empty space that you discover whether your pursuit is genuine or whether it was always just theater. I see this pattern endlessly. The entrepreneur who builds an empire but cannot sit alone with his thoughts for 10 minutes. The activist whose identity dissolves the moment the cause goes quiet. The spiritual seeker who accumulates practices like credentials but never touches actual transformation. We become collectors of experience rather than practitioners of depth. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. The performance of work often looks more impressive than the work itself. It's more visible, more shareable, more immediate in its rewards. The real work is messy, uncertain, frequently boring. It doesn't photograph well. It can't be explained at dinner parties. True inner work has long stretches where nothing seems to be happening. Where you're just sitting with discomfort, with questions that don't resolve, with parts of yourself you'd rather not meet. There's no content in that, no story arc, no breakthrough moment you can point to and say, there. That's when everything changed. Because it doesn't change all at once. It changes slowly, imperceptibly, like a tree growing. You don't see the growth daily. You only notice years later, when the shade has deepened, when the roots have spread farther than you imagined. The performance asks, what did you accomplish today? What can you show for it? The work asks, what did you face today? What truth did you stop running from? Entirely different questions, entirely different orientations. And I must tell you, this isn't about rejecting the external world or accomplishments. It's about understanding the proper order. When the inner work is primary, the outer manifestations follow naturally. They're expressions of integration, rather than compensations for emptiness. But when we reverse it, when we try to build identity from the outside in, we create structures that require constant maintenance, constant defense, constant proof. That's exhausting, and it's unsustainable. And here's what makes it worse. The more you try to prove yourself, the less authentic you become. Because you're not living from your center anymore, you're performing for an imaginary audience that's never satisfied. I've watched people transform their entire personality, trying to earn approval. They adopt opinions they don't believe. They pursue careers that drain them. They abandon hobbies they love, because those hobbies don't seem impressive enough. They curate every photograph, every conversation, every moment of their lives for external validation. And the tragedy? Even when they get the approval, it doesn't fill the void. Because deep down, they know it's not really them being approved of. It's the performance. It's the mask. So they're trapped. They can't stop performing because they fear losing the approval. But the approval they're getting doesn't actually nourish them, because it's not connected to who they truly are. This is what I meant when I said that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. The legitimate suffering would be facing the fear that maybe, just maybe, you're enough as you are, that you don't need to prove anything to anyone. That's terrifying, because it means letting go of control. It means accepting that some people won't like you, won't approve of you, won't validate you, and that's okay. The approval trap keeps you small. It keeps you manageable. It keeps you predictable. Because you're always calibrating your behavior based on external feedback, rather than internal truth. Breaking free requires something radical. You have to be willing to disappoint people. You have to be willing to be misunderstood. You have to be willing to stand in your truth even when it's not popular, not impressive, not applauded. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive. It means developing what I call a relationship with your own center. You check in with yourself before checking in with others. You ask, "Is this true for me?" before asking, "Will this impress them?" You develop the capacity to hold your own experience as valid, even when no one else witnesses it or affirms it. That's freedom. This self-validation doesn't mean you become rigid or unchallengeable. It means you stop requiring the world to constantly confirm that you exist, that you matter, that your experience is real. You've probably noticed this in people who've done deep inner work. They carry a certain ease, not arrogance, not detachment, just a quiet settledness. They can hear criticism without collapsing. They can receive praise without inflating. They're anchored somewhere the winds of opinion can't reach. This is what individuation offers. Not perfection, but rootedness. And here's where it gets fascinating. The more rooted you become in yourself, the more genuinely you can connect with others. Not less, more. Because you're no longer relating from need, you're relating from fullness. You're not scanning every conversation for reassurance. You're not performing. You're not managing impressions. You're just there, present, available. This is the great irony. The path inward makes the path outward clearer. People feel this. They sense when someone is with them versus using them for emotional supply. They relax around you because you're not pulling on them, not needing them to be anything other than what they are. You become a space where others can breathe. But this doesn't happen by accident. It requires something our culture rarely teaches: the willingness to endure your own company, to sit with yourself when there's no distraction, no validation, no applause. Most people can't do this. Not because they're weak, but because they've never been shown how. They've been taught to fear silence, to fill every gap, to keep moving so they don't have to feel. But you're learning to stop, to turn inward, to ask the questions that matter, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. The noise quiets. The desperation eases. You start to sense a presence within yourself that isn't contingent on anything outside. Some call it the self, some call it soul. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that you're finding your way home. And when you arrive, when you finally stand in the center of yourself, you'll realize something extraordinary. You were never actually lost. You were times becoming asterisk. Every wrong turn taught you direction. Every failure carved your character. Every moment you felt broken was actually you. Breaking times, open times, making room for something larger, truer, more aligned with who you were always meant to be. The person you are now could not have existed without every version you've been before. The anxious teenager who didn't fit in taught you empathy. The heartbroken lover showed you the depth of your capacity to feel. The burned-out professional revealed what you truly value. The lost wanderer forced you to question everything, and in that questioning, you discovered answers no one could have taught you. This is the paradox of the journey. You cannot skip steps. You cannot rush wisdom. You cannot arrive at yourself without first getting lost. And here's what the world doesn't tell you. Getting lost isn't the problem. Asterisk. Staying times lost is. The tragedy isn't in the confusion. It's in the refusal to move through it. It's in the numbing, the distracting, the constant running from yourself. It's in mistaking temporary comfort for genuine peace. Real peace doesn't come from avoiding the questions. It comes from living times, them so fully that one day, without even noticing, you've become the answer. So if you're watching this feeling like you're still in the middle of nowhere, good. That means you're exactly where you need to be. That means you're awake. You're honest. You're willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing while you figure out who you're meant to become. And that willingness, that courage to stay present with your own becoming, is the most sacred thing you possess. Don't waste it by rushing. Don't diminish it by comparing your journey to someone else's highlight reel. Don't abandon yourself by chasing someone else's definition of arrival. Your path is yours alone. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the noise and doubt and fear, you already know the way. You've always known. Now you just have to trust yourself enough to follow it. Because the treasure you've been searching for, it was never out there. It's been waiting inside you all along, patient, constant, whole. Waiting for you to come home.